Hey there, everybody. My name is Kyle, and today I wanted to talk about pretty much a CodeMonkey's guide to the basics of design. I'm lucky enough that most of the time, at least during my day job, I get to work with some really awesome designers. They have much more skill in graphic design than I do. They have that pinch of talent you need to really make something beautiful, but I don't really have that, and I don't always get to work with them. Sometimes when I'm working on freelance stuff or my own projects, sometimes there's just not the budget to go hire a freelance designer, and so the task of designing a nice web application or marketing website falls on me. And so this is going to be some of my basics that I've used, and along with some book recommendations for how a code monkey like me has figured out how to make something that at least is acceptable. And I haven't really had any clients that hate the stuff I put forward. It's not going to be that high design that you see on like award-winning websites. It's good enough to get the job done. The client's happy. It's usable. It's accessible, and you get paid. So basically, the first thing I do is look at what the logo is. So for our example, I'm just going to be taking a logo off Dribbble. So here's this nice little Bite Up app. I'll pull that into Photoshop, and I will grab whatever the primary color of the logo is, and I typically use that as the primary color of the website. So we got this nice orange down here. What's great about this is it also gives me like what the font should be, but that'd be the next step, is finding either exactly what the font is for the app or something similar to it. I typically like to design and work with system fonts. I'll default to Roboto because I believe that is the default system font on Android devices. But then I'll kind of fall back to whatever like the Apple system font is going to be. And then the Windows system font, I have like a different font stack that I kind of fall back on. I try not to use stylized fonts unless I really have to. And if I use something that's really fancy, that's going to be like a specific, font file that I have to import. I pull from Google Fonts or from wherever. And I try to limit the use of that. Ideally, I just want to use the system font so I don't have to worry about loading external fonts. Either way, we got our orange. The next step I do, after I figure out what font I'm going to use and the color, I usually go over to a little color tool that I built called colorpalette.app. And what I like to do is not just work with this one color that you're going to get from the logo, but I like to work with several shades of the color. So this is a tip I learned from the book Refactoring UI. It's one of the books I would recommend picking up if you're a code monkey like me who wants to learn some of the basics of design, as they talk about why you should be working with shades of color. And so I built the tool to help kind of like break down the shades when you're only given one color. So I'm going to add my color here, paste that in. I don't need a complementary color, so I'm just going to click add color. When I click on that, I get my 9 shades for this color. Now I could be adding extra colors if I need it, but I don't. So I should be pretty happy with this. The gray in here is pretty generic, so I'm not going to worry about it. I already have a generic neutral gray stack ready to go, so I'll just use that instead of this specific gray. Now that I have my color breakdown, I prefer to work within a accessibility kind of standard or guideline. So from here, I can go to export, and I could just grab these colors. They're available as CSS and SAS and both. I like to usually work with CSS variables, but I could grab each of these and paste them into my design software. So I usually work in Adobe XD. So I could start adding all these colors to my swatches and I can start designing with them. But I usually like to have a defined accessibility system, like I said. So I'm going to click check accessibility, which will open another app that I've written called Accessible Colors, and it'll import my color for me. So what I want here is to follow a predefined accessibility system. So if I click help, kind of shows the different breakdowns. So for our grayscale breakdown, which is right here, grayscale breakdown, this needs to have the first 2 shades pass a 7:1 contrast ratio, and the third and 6th shades need to pass the 4.5:1 contrast ratio. So when you look here, these light colors pass on the 2 darker colors, my off black and my black. However, for my white and my off white, some of the shades are failing. So then what I do is I'd click on this, and I'll probably darken this up a little bit, and I'll just kind of keep tweaking it until it passes. Oop, did the wrong one there. So I would kind of mess with these a little bit until they eventually pass. There we go. So eventually they're passing. Again, the overall for these only have to pass the AA accessibility, not the AAA. So it's okay that they fail on those, but it passes my system. So my grayscale breakdown is done. So now in help, if we look at the shading breakdown, requires that the first 3 and the last 3 shades must be accessible with each other. So we go to shading breakdown. These 3 in the corner of each needs to pass the 7:1 contrast ratio. So these all pass, and these 3 all pass. And then the 3 most outer colors need to pass the 4.5:1 contrast ratio. So you can see they fail the 7:1, but they pass the 4.5:1. So as of right now, this color scheme is passing my accessible color system. So the reason why I do this is because I don't want to have to think what's going to be accessible. I know, because I've made everything match this system, that color number 7 here is going to be accessible when it's compared to a white background, or white's going to be accessible on it. Same thing with my off-white. So I can kind of look at this and say, okay, my darkest brown, or what's supposed to be an orange, but it turns to brown when it gets dark enough. My brown here is going to be accessible on these different shades of the lighter color. So I can go just the off, or a little bit darker, a little bit darker. These ones in the middle, I typically just use for graphics or some like icon stuff. Some backgrounds where I'm not going to have any sort of text or anything on it. So these are all going to be failing, which is okay. They're usually kind of used to style certain things or color, usually, like I said, illustrations or graphics or whatever is going to be used in those. But I do this so that my text, if I work within the system and I only use these colors back and forth on each other and on the black and whites, I know that I'm going to be passing accessibility, so I don't have to constantly jump back and forth, do some sort of like contrast checker and remind myself, does this pass? I used to do that a lot, where I'd pick one of these shades and I would check it on white, and then half an hour later, I wouldn't remember if it passed, so I would do it again and again and again. And I realized I was wasting a lot of time rechecking these colors to make sure they were accessible. So I decided, let's just define a accessibility system and set up some sort of guideline and make sure my colors fit within it. Of course, if I was still going to actually use this, I'd probably tweak the 6th color here, because the shading isn't the best. It goes from here to here, and I don't think it transitions the best, so I might tweak some of these colors, but for the most part, this is pretty good to go. This also has a nice comparison tool, so if we add additional colors, I'm not going to add it, I'm just going to reset to the defaults. If you have a color and you have like your neutral color, then you can actually do a comparison. So my primary color and my secondary, and in the comparison breakdown, I can see when stuff passes and fails. The system doesn't require that any particular color passes on any secondary color, so it's okay if some of these pass, they pass. If they fail, they fail. I just use this as a quick way to check, and I don't try to memorize like all these different pass-fail situations. Sometimes when I have to put a blue on a gray or whatever, I'll just quick check it and see like, okay, cool, my blue here passes this, which this is my off-white, so I know that's going to pass. But as soon as you get into these darker grays, it's kind of 50-50 shot really if it's going to pass or fail, and I'll just check it on the fly. So once I export these colors, again, grabbing all these new modified colors and sticking them into my design software, we move on to the next phase of how I typically design stuff as a non-graphical designer, graphic designer. What I usually do is go to Dribble or CSS Awards or awards.com, and I just start searching similar things, or I'm just starting to browse web design, and I find a bunch of different styles that I really like. And then I just start saving a ton of images to a folder. Anything that looks interesting that I would want to steal, I go through and I start stealing. Now, when I say steal, I mean it in the sense like what Picasso said, in that great artists borrow, but the best artists steal, or something like that. That's a quote he's widely known for saying. I'm not sure if he was the original author of that quote, or maybe he stole it from someone else. But I typically go through and I just find any idea that I think is worth stealing. And of course, it's not exactly like cut and paste their design, but you're just kind of taking their ideas, because you don't really work in a vacuum. You're not expected to stare at a blank white new window in XD or Figma or whatever you design in, and then just expected to just come up with something completely new and unique. You're expected to find patterns and find styles that are already existing in the world, users are already used to, that look good, that fit within the brand, or help shape the voice that the brand is trying to form, and you're expected to kind of tweak them a bit to make them look good. So I had probably about a dozen or so different website references and dribble designs that I downloaded. And then I got to work on what ended up becoming the final design that the client chose. So I threw together a couple different designs that I wanted to work with, and I want to kind of break down, where I got the ideas from. So this font, I really like this font. So I took it from one of the designs, figured out what it was, or at least something super close to it, and took the font from one design. This kind of element of like an image that has some sort of shapes over it, took that from a different design. This search box style here with like the soft blue shadow, took that from a third design. The design with that had these, so I liked the idea of like the soft shadow with the icons in there, so took those as well. Scrolling down, I saw this kind of illustrated laptop here on a different design selling software, so I created something similar to that in Illustrator and then threw in my own thing here, along with some text next to it. This customer layout, the dotted patterns came from one design, and the actual cards with the images came from a completely different design. I decided to add little quote icons in there and kind of change up some of the spacing so they're not, one-to-one copy and paste, but the general idea of some sort of box, 3 of them, putting people's faces in there was one thing, and then adding the dots, you kind of take a bunch of different ideas and you start shaping them into your own thing. And then the frequent asked questions was just something I threw together on my own. And then to help give it its own kind of look and feel, I added the waves, which didn't come from any particular design. I don't think any of them had any sort of changing background design pattern or even any wavy things. I just liked the waves, so I decided to use them. And then this footer layout with the logo and the lines, and then this kind of structure, the overall layout came from yet another design. But then the actual implementation of it, of the white logo here and these icons and stuff like that, it's specific to my design, and I adjust the spacing, I adjust the font sizes and weights and colors as I see fit. I just took the general layout of it. So sometimes you're taking the layout from stuff, sometimes you're taking the graphical elements, like taking and recreating some sort of laptop like this from some. Maybe sometimes you're just taking, again, maybe like a layout or the usage of an icon for one. Or maybe a font that you find that you really like. So the whole point of this is that even though I am just a code monkey and I don't particularly care for design, I can appreciate good design, but I don't find it easy to create, and I don't find it that rewarding to create. But sometimes I am forced to create my own designs, and when that happens, this is my usual workflow of get the logo from the client, figure out what my font's going to be, I figure out what my color breakdowns are going to be, I make sure that they're accessible, I input everything into XD here, and then I just get to work and I throw together, 4 to maybe 8 different initial concepts, and then I throw all those at the client and they just pick one that they like or one they would want to see changes to, and then I work from there and we go through maybe like a second round of a revision, maybe a third round of revisions, and then at that point they have something that's pretty much what they want, and usually maxing out my abilities and my skills, and we just kind of go from there, and I get to do the fun stuff like actually implementing all this and building everything. Now let's talk about some books. One of the books that I would highly recommend is Refactoring UI. This was probably the first design book that I started reading, and it's actually something I keep open whenever I have to design something. I constantly refer back to it just to make sure I'm making something that doesn't look too terrible. So it's a great book. It's kind of aimed towards code monkeys and people who really don't have the specific like design tactics and skills, but like it's explained here, it's from a developer point of view. It helps you like walk through how to think outside the database using fewer borders. So programmers, we usually typically come up with some pretty ugly stuff, and so this kind of breaks down how to actually make these clean, sleek, modern looking web components and elements without having to rely on a designer make all the decisions for us. And again, for me, it really helps with not having to spend the cost to go hire some sort of freelance designer to design something for me, when I can just use some of these basic tips and tricks to create something that's good enough. The other book that I don't always keep open, but I've definitely read through a couple different times, is Don't Make Me Think. This is the revisited version. It has some like more modern, like mobile stuff and some application level stuff for the current web. I would definitely recommend purchasing this and giving it a read maybe once or twice a year, just to keep in mind the different tactics and the different user experience based stuff. The whole purpose of this book is less of here is exactly how to implement things like refactoring UI is. It's more of a book about like what it says here, common sense approach to web usability. So it talks about how do you lay out content? How do you structure your pages? Making sure the user has a really solid mental model when they're on their website. You want to be unique in your style and your tone of voice within your content, but you also don't want to be so completely out there that the user doesn't know how to get back to the homepage, because they kind of anchor themselves to the homepage and they explore the website from there. When they join into an article or into one of your product pages, they eventually will go back to the homepage and then start exploring that way. So how do you make sure they can always get back to that homepage? There's always that anchor spot, that landing point that they can always get back to. And how do you layer your content? How much content you put on there? People have the issue of adding way too much content, and they'll write paragraphs of text and images and stuff like that on like their homepage, or they'll just throw way too much stuff at a certain page, an important landing page. And really, if they would have just had a few sentences explaining exactly what this product is or what this page is about or whatever, or what the service is, how do you keep things super thin and light? You want to have impactful content, but not a ton of impactful content, because then people don't actually read. Users are just skimming pages and they're looking for headings throughout your content, because people are going to jump from bold word to heading to bold word to bold word to heading, and they're just going to be skimming down the page. And when they find something that piques their interest, then they're going to actually maybe start to read or at least skim through the actual paragraph of text. So how do you design this to help the user scan the website quickly to find what they're looking for, and then they can reread that paragraph that they skipped? So these are both really great books, and I would highly recommend picking up both of them. If you only want to get one to start with, I would get the Refactoring UI. It's a PDF. You can download it, and again, just keep it open whenever you have to design something. It'll make your life a lot easier. And that's about it for me for this video. If you have any questions or suggestions, please feel free to leave a comment below. I would love to hear about different books or different online resources like Refactoring UI that anyone else is knowledgeable about or has experience with and I don't. Please feel free to let me know. I would love to check them out, or purchase something new if it helps me just get a little bit better. As always, my name is Kyle, and I'll see you next time.